this stand. We thought we moved it down enough, and it's still tilted.
Its favorite thing in life is to fall over.
I thought, I'm not that short. That's just too short. It was way down here. Well, as Court said, I'm Dr. Delana Reed, and believe it or not, I have been teaching at ETSU for many years, since 1999, fall of 1999. And the storytelling program brought me to ETSU. I was teaching communication before that at a small private college in Kentucky. And so I've been here ever since. One of the things I love about the area, besides storytelling, is the mountains and hiking. Such a beautiful area. I love to get outside as often as possible. Although I'll admit, when I was working on my PhD, that didn't happen much at all. But that's a whole different story, and that's not what we're here about tonight. I'm here to work as your MC to introduce our storytellers. First, I want to say that each storyteller is a current member of our graduate program. We have a Master's of Arts in Storytelling, Communication and Storytelling Studies. It's unique. We've had storytelling at ETSU for decades, actually. I think our first graduate was in 1989, well before I came. But when we joined the communication department, we formed really a unique approach to communication and storytelling blending together. And I think that's been drawing a lot of interest. And we've had more and more students come. We're glad you did. Glad you're part of this. Okay, I want to introduce our first storyteller. Our first storyteller is Corey Howard. Now, Corey didn't give me much to say. In fact, I should have gotten back to you because I got back to other people and made them tell me more. But I do know that Corey is working this semester. He started as our graduate assistant, and he's doing a really good job, working hard to help us put on our productions, and I want to thank him for doing that. He also hails from North Carolina and California. So that's an interesting combination. I bet he's got some stories about that. And I think what's on his mind most right now is that he just turned 40.
Thanks a lot.
He said he thinks he likes it.
He didn't look a day older than 39.
Jack Benny, right? He's open to suggestions from the over 40 crowd about how to make the most of this new era. I like Corey's imaginative, quirky bent that permeates his stories. Let's welcome Corey Howard to the stage.
Real quick. So now my secret's out. Y'all know I'm the big 4-0. And like I said, I am open to suggestions. Oh, you want me to make sure that? I think we're good.
Yeah.
I'm open to suggestions about what to do with the second half of my life, but I don't think anybody here is over 40. This is a youthful crowd. So if you know anyone who is, you let me know. But it's great to see y'all. And anyway, turning 40 got me thinking a lot, because here's another secret I'm going to tell you. Certified bachelor over here. The certificate's actually in the mail. So certified bachelor pending. And it's not because I haven't tried to make it work in some relationships. I've just encountered too many irreconcilable differences. And here we are, you know, I hate to kick off a Love Springs 4th Valentine's themed show with a story about irreconcilable differences in love, but you know what? I'm keeping it real. That's what I do, folks. Just so authentic. And so, so it got me thinking about irreconcilable differences, and it got me thinking, I wonder if anyone has ever been able to overcome irreconcilable differences. And this pointed me to a story in our friends in the animal kingdom. And, well, our story begins with two young lovers from different sides of the ecosystem, but they just couldn't wait any second longer to spend the rest of their lives together. And well, we find ourselves with the hero of this story on his way to propose to his betrothed. Is that how you say it? Beloved and betrothed together? I think you'll feel free to use that word later on. And you just remember, it was started here in the Buffalo Room at the Tanasi Arts and Heritage Center. So anyway, here we go. Well, Froggy went a-courting and he did right, Froggy went a-courting and he did right, Froggy went a-courting and he did right. He got his sword and his pistol by his side, Well, he said, Miss Mousy, will you marry me, He said, Miss Mousy, will you marry me, He said, Miss Mousy, will you marry me? You got me down here on my slimy little knee, and his knee really was so slimy. Well, without my Uncle Rat's consent, no way. Without my Uncle Rat's consent, Without my Uncle Rat's consent, why I wouldn't marry the president, no way, we gotta ask him. So, if it was me, and it's not, like I said, who am I to judge, because 40 years old, certified bachelor, but I have a few questions. If it were me, if I was about to propose eternal wedded bliss with my beloved, I'm not sure I want the first image that she sees of me to be of me wielding a giant knife and a gun in her direction. But to be fair, on the other side, if I was Froggy, I might have a question such as, how did a rat come to be the uncle of a mouse? And how did this rat come to be the one who has the consent over whether or not and who she can and can't marry? But like I said, they're wearing these love goggles and they're just not thinking about that right now because, well, Uncle Rat gave his consent, Uncle Rat gave his consent, Well, Uncle Rat gave his consent. He even volunteered to pay for the wedding tent, and they had a wedding, and it was a big deal, and everybody came. Well, the first 3 months was wedded bliss, The first 3 months was wedded bliss, The first 3 months was wedded bliss. All they did was kiss and 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 kiss. But then came the first holiday, To Froggy's family they went away, oh no. And Froggy's family was so opinionated, they liked all the things that Mousy hated. Oh no, can you see where this is going yet? The car ride home was a little awkward. Froggy didn't notice that the light in Mousy's eyes had dimmed and she turned her head away from him. Oh no, oh no, oh no, the cracks are starting to show. But also Froggy lay awake in bed that night. Something in his mind just wasn't right. He woke Miss Mousy and he said, when we said the blessing, did you bow your head? Because that's kind of a big deal in my family. Miss Mousy, she wasn't sure what to say. Oh, what the heck, he'd have to find out someday anyway. I didn't bow my head because, well, I don't believe in God. Oh, I'm sorry, come again. What did you just say? Can you repeat that? And then what happened, what followed was a conversation that took until the sun came up. And honestly, it wasn't resolved then. Because Froggy, well, he was raised in such a way that he didn't know that believing or not believing in God was an option at all. In fact, God to him was like the water is to the fish. It just was. And Mousy, she explained to him, well, I understand how you could believe that there's a big protector out there for you. You're beloved in the animal kingdom. Your sweet, beautiful song, it sings people to sleep at night. Even the food you eat, the flies, the mosquitoes, they're nuisances to everyone. You're rejoiced for doing this. You have some predators for sure, but you've been endowed with these beautiful legs that allow you to swim fast and to jump high. But a mouse's entire existence is to flirt with death and devastation at every second. Nothing is promised to us. Even our food we have to scrounge for. And so all I know as a mouse is that this moment, this now, that's all I have. And because of that, I've come to align myself with a spiritual practice known as Buddhism. And like I said, this conversation didn't end when the sun came up. And as you all probably know, when it comes to religious differences, there just is not a lot of wiggle room. And the conversation unfolded for months and months, and the months turned into a year. And Froggy would come home from work with all these different facts that he'd Googled about the existence of God. And Mousy, well, the more he came at her, the more she would retreat into the nest of her mind. Froggy, he wasn't trying to bully her. He just was a gregarious fellow. He lived with his heart on his sleeve. And, his spiritual practice taught him that you're rewarded for belief with an afterlife. And he wanted to spend the rest of his life with this person, this mouse he loves so much. Excuse me. That's really offensive to the mouse community, by the way. Because humans are one of their biggest enemies. And Mousy, she wasn't trying to alienate Froggy, but she was a very private person. She was very cerebral, and when she doesn't have an answer to something, she just tends to retreat. Well, I hate to say it, but eventually it seemed like there was no more rope left, and in fact, Mousy went to court to file for a divorce. Mousy went to court to file for a divorce. And the judge said, yes, I understand, but first, have you heard of this thing called the Enneagram? It's a personality test that helps you understand each other better. And she hadn't heard of the Enneagram, and the judge said, please, before you break up, just try it. Just try it. That's all I'm saying. Take it home and try it. And Froggy was skeptical, but he loved this mouse so much, he was willing to try anything. And so they took the test, and it revealed that Mousy was a 5, the investigator, and Froggy was an 8, the challenger. They read the book, and it didn't take links to see their differences as strengths. That's right, that's what the Enneagram helped them to do. So the beautiful thing about the Enneagram is it helps you to see there are not weaknesses in your personality. You just are who you are, and you may react to a thing in a certain way because this is how your personality lends you to react. For example, if you bump me about something, instead of taking it personally, I could go, oh, well, I'm reacting as a 5 would react to the way that you behave because you're an 8. And so Froggy and Mousy learned to respect each other and their differences. And in fact, a beautiful thing happened, which the more they opened their hearts to this new lens, the more they were able to go, I may not understand that, but I love you, and I love that I get to see you love something, right? And they took these little consolations along the way, and soon enough, well, you're never going to believe this, but Mousy went to church with Froggy, Mousy started going to church with Froggy, oh yeah. Now, she wouldn't call herself a strict Christian, but she found some things, she found some truth and beauty, and she really gave it her best concerted effort. Meek shall inherit the earth, that's 1. Love your neighbor, don't go it alone, that's 2. The child of God, he has no home, like you without sin. Cast the first stone. She really did like a lot of the teachings in church. And guess what? Froggy read a Buddhism book now and then. He liked Thich Nhat Hanh and Pema Chodron. Well, he opened his mind and he took it all in, and the more he read, the less it threatened him. That's kind of how it goes with education. They learn to see their relationship as exercise. Takes work every day, you gotta keep at it. But there comes a point when you get in shape, and the more you struggle, the more growth that takes place. I'm sad to report, but pain is relative to growth. It's not always easy, it's not always fair, But their marital fabric shall not tear, Because their happiness is best when shared, and their sorrows are lighter when paired, That's how they got to where they are now. And where they are now is they live to the ripe old age of 2.5 years. And they're surrounded by a passel of hybrid frog mouse children, and every night they say, Mommy and Daddy, tell us the story of how you got together. And Mousy just laughs, and she looks at Froggy and she says, well, Froggy went a-courting and he did right, Froggy went a-courting and he did right, Froggy went a-courting and he did right. He had a sword and a pistol by his side. And how in the world did I say yes to that man? And Froggy leaned back in his favorite chair and he thought, I'm the luckiest frog in the whole wide ecotone. The end.
That was a great opening, so energetic. We got all energized with that. It was fun. Fun. Quite a version of Froggy Manure. Okay, I'd like to introduce our next storyteller, who is Vienna Isbister. Vienna, didn't you grow up in around here? No? Okay, but she has been in Johnson City for a while, and in fact, she got her bachelor's in, it's in theater with a minor in storytelling and in dance. In fact, she sort of waltzed into my storytelling class when she was working on her bachelor's and got hooked. So luckily for us, she decided to come back and participate in the master's program, and she's doing a wonderful job. Vienna is really passionate about blending these different performance mediums together, and she likes to uncover the story in each piece of art. There's art in everything, and she looks at life as though every new opportunity thrown her way is a potential for a story and art. Some of the other things she likes to do, though, I think you might find interesting, is as she walks, maybe you do this too, she watches a lot on YouTube and plays tabletop role-playing games. Let's welcome Vienna Isbister to the stage.
Hello. Can we hear me okay? Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Some of my most favorite adventures that I've ever been on have been starting as day is turning into night. As the air begins to cool and still, that's when I realize that I want to do the most. I want to explore the most. One of my favorite adventures happened the first semester of undergrad. I had just turned 18. I've lived a very sheltered life up to this point, right? So I was homeschooled until 8th grade. I had moved a bunch, had 2 younger siblings, was not allowed to date at all. And I even just got my first cell phone at the end of high school. So I had only had my phone maybe 3-4 months. And I wanted to be bold. I didn't know what I wanted out of life, but I knew that I wanted more than what I had. I had a weird experience about the month earlier. This was in October. And I decided that I wanted to go walk to my favorite restaurant and have my first sit-down dinner by myself. I didn't have a license, didn't have a car. I was on campus. I was finishing up a show, right? So I was working box office for the theater department on the show called Stop Kiss. And I don't know what it was about this night, early October, but I wanted to go then. Well, so I'd been pumping myself up all night, right? And the other usher at the door, Tyler, was his name, and I had been talking about this, and I was telling him how excited I was. I was gonna walk all the way, all by myself to get dinner. At my first sit-down restaurant experience. I was so excited. Oh, it's way different going with family, I promise. So we were pumping myself up the whole time, and we got ready to leave, and we walked outside of the building. It was a yellow road. And I turned to say goodbye. And I told him exactly where I was going. I was going to stop at my dorm on my way, because adventurers need something. I can't remember what I needed now, but it must have been important for me to stop at my dorm. And I was going to keep going all the way to Portobello's. So I said goodbye, and I turned, and I left. I was wearing wedge shoes this day. It's not really suitable for a long walk, but I was determined that I was going to go regardless. And I started to walk. And I walked. And I walked until I got around the corner of the building. And as I got around the corner of the building, I had a thought. Should I have asked him? He had walked, I turned around at this point, he was gone. And I felt in my gut this little tiny voice. Maybe you should have asked him. Did you want to ask him? No, this is my adventure. This is my story. I make the choice. I'm going by myself. But should I have asked him? No, I shouldn't have asked him, I told the voice inside of me. No, this is my adventure. If he wanted to go, he would have asked me. So I keep walking. I have my little headphones in, the ones with the string, right? They were white, and the string hung at the front of the buttons on my little jacket that I was wearing. And I had my little hat with the brim, and I was walking. And I had a goal in mind, right? So it was a little bit dark on campus at this point. This was in 2016, so they hadn't put all the lights on the main strip yet. So I was gonna walk until I hit the first light, and then I'd stop for a second and check my phone and change the song. So I was walking. I was listening to some musical, and I'm walking, and I'm feeling my confidence rise, and I'm so excited to get Italian food. I love Italian food. And I'm walking, and I'm walking, and I'm almost to the edge of the light, and I feel myself getting puffed up and excited, and then I hear my name. Now I have to tell you, sometimes I hear things. I think aloud a lot, so sometimes, you hear your own name. So I ignore it, and I keep walking, and I'm almost to the light. I'm like 3 feet away from the light that's right outside of my dorm room. And as I get there, I hear my name. I take out my headphone. It can't just be me. And I hear one last, Vienna! And I turn around, headphones still in hand, and there's Tyler, running like something's chasing him. I'm standing at the edge of the light with the headphone in my hand, and he comes running up to me. He was dressed really nicely this day, not really suitable for running. Khakis and a button down and really freshly polished shoes. And he's like, oh, thank goodness I caught you. I didn't know. Did you want me to ask you to dinner? Should I have asked you to dinner? I really want to ask you to dinner. Can I go with you? I didn't know what to say. I'd never been asked out before. What do you do in these situations? My mind is racing at the top of volume, and I can't see anything, and I can't hear anything. And then all of a sudden, my focus comes back to him, and as he says, are you gonna say yes? Uh-huh. Yeah? Okay, good. All right, I'll be back. I'm just gonna run to my car. I'll be right back. And I'm standing there in the edge of the light, and suddenly it didn't feel cool outside anymore. It was really warm, like right here. And I was really excited. I'm so excited that I ran all the way up the stairs into my dorm, and I ran up all 5 flights of stairs instead of taking the elevator to go into my dorm room to do nothing. To just run back out and run back down the 5 flights of stairs to stand there waiting patiently for this person's car that I had no idea what it looked like, and to wait patiently for what I would only assume to be my first date. He picked me up. It was an old beat-up Jeep. It had the fabric at the top hanging down, so you almost couldn't see the road. It was that kind of Jeep. And we drove the 0.2 miles to this parking lot with the restaurant. We got food. It's like 11 o'clock at night at this point. And then we walk. We walked around the parking lot for 3 hours. We walked so long I didn't even feel my feet hurting anymore. And then we walked some more. And we talked. We talked about what life meant, what we wanted life to mean. Those 2 things are really different when you're in undergrad. It was wonderful. I could never imagined a better first date than one walking around a parking lot. And he dropped me off at my dorm, and I gave him my phone number. It was really exciting. I had never given a dude my phone number before. And then I went upstairs, and I went to bed, sort of. You never really go to bed after these situations. And I waited, because he said he was going to call. Day 1. Didn't call. Day 2. Didn't call. Day 3. Didn't call. Morning of day 4, I was beginning to think I had done something wrong, right? I didn't know what I had done. I didn't know how to date. And maybe I should have just gone to dinner by myself. Maybe it would have been so much better if I just walked to the Kroger parking lot to go to Portobello's all on my own. And as these thoughts are swirling, and I feel really, really sad, I get a message on Instagram. Also something I didn't have before college. And I open up the Instagram messages, and there's a message from Tyler. I was like, oh. And I open it, and he's like, hey, period. Did you mean to give me the wrong phone number? I did not. That's how new I was to my phone, that I had no idea that I'd given the wrong phone number. Well, regardless, I gave him the proper phone number, and we talked through our lovely first date. And we made plans for our second date. The second date was pretty great. But that's a story for another time. Thank you.
We'll have to get her to tell us more another time. All those first dates, and especially in college, that was a lot of firsts, wasn't it? A lot of firsts, good. All right. Well, our next storyteller is Travis Wolven. And this is like old history, but he actually worked as a graduate assistant for us too, some time back. But Travis has been an educator for over 15 years, and boy, because he has done a lot of work as teaching English as a second language, he has traveled around the world. He's taught and lived in Georgia. That's a long way away. Boston, Massachusetts, Tennessee, Mongolia, the Philippines, and South Korea. So he's been met lots of interesting people doing that. And he said he just accidentally became a storyteller because he was really interested in using stories to teach language. Let's welcome Travis up.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's always that moment where I end up going cross-eyed when it gets to here, and then I become aware of the audience again. So I appreciate y'all. So yeah, it's kind of crazy talking about the traveling. It's kind of crazy how you can go to the other side of the world and sometimes have moments where you really feel like you're at home. And for this story on this particular night, I was in Manila in the Philippines, and I was on this kind of concrete balcony area on the 4th or 5th floor at this hostel that I was staying at. And I remember sitting there hot summer nights in high school when I would sit with my friend Ricky on our front porch, and we talked about people that kind of had shunned us, being outsiders. We had talked about women or people who wouldn't date us, but a lot of stories and tall tales there. But on this particular night, instead of Ricky, I was talking to Rodrigo, who was a 60-year-old self-identified race car driver from Mexico. And this was the 3rd night in a row that I had sat on that porch or balcony and talked to him. And the first 2 nights, he had regaled me with tales of winning or almost winning, or pulling his friends from busted up shrapnel-covered cars and having to help recover them and make sure that they were still alive. Stories of life and death. So finally on that 3rd night, over another beer, he decided to ask me a question, how things are going for me. So I had kind of let him on my struggle at that moment, which was the fact that for the first time in my life, I was having to actually, instead of chasing and not really getting anywhere, I was having to choose between 3 women who I had been on dates with and who I'd been interested in. And he just stared at me. And he just threw up his arms, and I remember he was yelling at me when I was telling the story and just complaining, and he said, "Travis, you're in," and you can enter expletive here, but anyways, there's just so many expletives, and what kind of person was I that this was my problem in life? And he just kept saying, "You have to do something. You never know when you're going to die," just like my friends who died in those races. So not really knowing what to do, and trying to do something, I decided that night to go ahead and get my journal. Figured that was something I would write and think. And I remember looking at my journal and thinking about, the 2 other women I had gone on dates with, and I'd realized that who they were had nothing to do with my particular predicament. And then I had thought about the 3rd woman. And I had thought about the way that she had made me feel, and being noticed by her. And for some reason, I just decided to stop writing, and somewhere between that 2nd and 3rd line, there's a kind of invisible ink written about her image and how she looked with her jet black, bouncy hair with her little flip at the bottom. How she kind of joyful gazed right into my heart. And no games at all. I decided I wasn't going to write about her because I didn't want to write a story that I wasn't going to live. And when I thought about it more, and I thought back on myself, for some reason I just had this image in my mind of my grandmother. And I remembered I would go visit her over the summer in New Jersey. And I remember one night I was laying on the living room floor as we were watching Wheel of Fortune. And somebody came in with some boxes, and my grandmother said, "Hey, Pumpkinhead, why don't you come sit over here?" And so I sat my back, as she had instructed, against the back of the bottom of the couch. And she sat near me. And she thought this was kind of weird. And the next thing I remember is there was these cool, almost beams of light just kind of grazing my hair lightly. And she just sat there and played with my hair. She asked me about my day. I just remember the thought of feeling noticed and touched and sharing a moment with someone. And that same feeling is what I had experienced with this person. So I closed my journal, and I decided to do something about it. That night I had actually brilliantly planned to meet up with another woman, and then that 3rd woman, her name was Sunshine, the same night. I went out to meet the first woman, and it was okay. It was as she had planned, and she had made perfect plans for what she had wanted to do. I cut the plans early, and I said, I'm really apologize. You're really nice. I need to go. She was stunned, too, because she had offered for me to spend the night and meet her dad, and she's like, "Oh, and I'll make you breakfast." But I just did not feel like we were connecting. I felt like I was a role to play. So I went back to the hostel, and I was actually running late to meet up with Sanjay. And I remember she was a little bit ticked. And and her and her friend were like, "Hey, we've been waiting for like 5-10 minutes." And then she said something in Korean, and I looked at her, and she's like, "Wait a second, you don't know Korean? You said you knew Korean." I was like, "Oh, no, I know a couple words." So we had a couple jokes, and they said, "Okay, come on, let's go get ice cream." So we actually walked down the road, and even though it was in Manila, it actually, again, felt like the US. We went to the mall, we went to the Haagen-Dazs ice cream shop and had ice cream. Really nice. And as we started talking, her friend Ji-sun was looking at both of us and just kind of realizing she wasn't part of the conversation. So she looked at both of us and said, "Okay, I want both of y'all to have a nice night. And I'm going to go back now." And she looked at Sunjin and she said, "Because we need to go to Philippines, or we need to catch a flight tomorrow morning to Singapore. So I hope that you get back early tonight because we need to be rested for our one-day tour of that city. So Ji-sun left. Well, Sungjin and I kept talking. We talked about our lives, our interests. She asked me lots of questions. I felt really noticed. And as we talked, I realized, looking at her, that not only did I just want to touch her or hold her hand, I wanted her to want to touch me in some way. And the night dragged on, the mall closed, we're kicked out. Once it got to about 2 a.m., we said, you know what? Why don't we wait to see the sunrise? So we asked around where we could go to watch the sunrise. And a couple people had told us, in broken English, to go to a certain place in the day. Well, we tried to go there. We kept getting lost, trying to go to different places. Eventually we found this 24-hour pizza cafe. We ate there, and as soon as we started to watch the horizon and see light come over it, we decided to go outside. So we were trying to find the best view, and we could just barely see the crack of red. And we slowly walked towards this one area that was kind of jutting into the water, and we ran over, and we could start to see the sun crest. And as we were seeing the sun crest, we smelled this awful smell. We looked over, and we were next to just this giant pile of trash and boxes and old clothes and flies, and it was so grotesque and awful. We had to cover our mouths, but also we got to look at the sun, and it was gorgeous as it came over the horizon. And at that moment, someone just said, "Oh my gosh, I have to get back for my flight." And so we turned around, and in my mind, I thought, "Oh my gosh, I hadn't asked her to hold her hand, or I haven't touched this person, or anything. We haven't." And so we were about to cross the road. This taxi was about to go, and we had this kind of moment, and then I felt her fingers run down my forearm, and she had grabbed my hand. And I thought, yes! And then she pulled me across the road. And so we were running, and we were holding hands. We were running even faster. Eventually we had separated, and we were just running, and for some reason we were laughing. I guess it was delirium. And so we got back to the hostel, and she ran upstairs. And as she ran upstairs, I thought, oh my gosh, this is the life I keep living, where I don't ask the person. I don't go out of my way to ask what I'm looking for, which was to just hold her hand. And so I heard her and Ji-sun arguing. Ji-sun was saying something about the fact that she thought she was dead or missing in some alley. She couldn't get in touch with her all night, and now Sungjin was going to be asleep for their trip in Singapore. And so I went upstairs, and I said my goodbyes, and I looked at Sungjin. I thought, this is the moment. And I said, "Can I hold your hand?" She, okay. And she just kind of held my hand with her friend looking in the background. And she said, do you want a hug? Maybe can I just give you a hug? So we hugged. So they left, and I went back onto the balcony. It was about 7:30 a.m., and Rodrigo was there, already with a beer. And he said, "So, did you?" And I said, yeah, I asked to hold her hand. And he said, "What?" And I said, "And she did." And he shook his head. And I knew what he was thinking. Thank you.
Young love. If you didn't already know, which you should have by the literature that was in the PR that came out, this is supposed to be our celebration of Valentine's Day. The title of our program is Love Springs Forth. Not as springy tonight as we would like. It's going to get colder again. But you know, we're just really appreciate being invited to tell stories for all of you, and we want you to know that the fact that you're here to enjoy the stories with us is extremely important. You can be a storyteller to a degree by yourself, because you can be an audience to yourself. But it's not really going to work unless you have people who want to be on the receiving end and are participating in this whole process of creating these images. We may create images in our mind's eye, but you have your own images, and we just hope that what we're transferring to you is something that is meaningful for you. Fun, meaningful, however you want to look at it. Our next storyteller is Cassidy Smith. Now, Cassidy delights in telling stories that range from the traditional folk tale and fairy tale to personal adventures. Now, in fact, she's taken us on a few adventures in class last fall. I mean, I've heard her go from a ghost story around the campfire, and she got the room all set up just perfectly for that, to telling, in fact, the story she's telling tonight over in a completely different style, completely different setting. So I know that you're going to be fascinated with what she has to say. She does have a Bachelor of Arts in Music from Kansas Wesleyan University, voice. Vocal performance was her major, and we've also been able to enjoy a little bit of that. She's a wonderful singer. But what she really finds important is using her voice to build bridges between people of all walks of life. And Cassidy's passion for human connection and community really infiltrates her storytelling style in every way. She's really pleased to be able to share with you tonight. Let's welcome Cassidy Smith.
I think so. You all hear me all right? Thank you, Dr. Reed. The moon's shape was a constant source of anxiety for her mother, the Earth. Her mother, who teemed with life and was always changing, and yet somehow her shape was always the same. She would look to her lunar daughter and say, "Some nights you are so small that you disappear entirely, and we don't even notice your absence." Some nights, the moon was so big and bright and round that her mother would chastise her and say, "Why can't you be as small as your sister's stars? You are so big that you threaten to outshine your father, the sun." Now, all flocks of life flourished beneath her mother's skies, and her mother would say to her, "People flock to me. They come and walk amongst my hills and valleys, and yet you are so friendless and barren. Why can't you be more warm and welcoming like me?" And now the moon resented this. The moon actually quite liked her space, thank you very much. She liked being alone. And sure, she would have loved visitors once in a while, but for the most part, she was just thankful that she had no life to take care of other than herself. But it remained like this. For millions and billions of years, her mother's chastisement, her father's bright burning energy, the silence of her sisters only lent themselves to her inconstant appearance. Because some nights she would be so angry and full of rage that she would hang blood red up in the sky, and other nights she would be so sad that she would hang blue. And she sat like this for millions and millions of years, cold and distant and alone and friendless and angry and sad and lonely, until one day visitors arrived. Tiny travelers from her mother's flock of life landed on her surface. And to be honest, she didn't really mind. She actually quite liked the way it felt when they bounced among her craters, and she loved the little footprints they left in the sand and those flags that they planted so proudly. It made her smile. It made her feel important, like she was worth visiting. And those tiny travelers soon enough left, but they came back. And they brought more with them. And these tiny travelers, they would pick up rocks from her surface, and they would take them back home, and they would share them with others and put them in prominent places and admire her. And she felt so proud because she felt like she was worth sharing. These tiny travelers often came and went, but she didn't mind their presence. And now that she knew they were coming back, her loneliness didn't feel so lonely. Space felt quiet and peaceful, knowing that they'd return. And one night, after many tiny travelers had wandered beneath her atmosphere in the sky, one arrived that was different than all the others. This one was smaller and quieter and tread more gently. But what made this one most extraordinary was that she spoke to the moon. the first time in millions and billions of years, somebody thought to ask the moon how she felt. The moon was so shocked at this that at first she said nothing. She was silent, but this tiny traveler, she was patient, and she waited. When the moon did begin to speak, it was slowly at first, like water seeping through the crack in a stone. But as she talked, that crack widened and out rushed a river of millions and billions of years of emotion and sadness. And she told the tiny traveler of her rage and her fear of loneliness, her mother's chastisement, her rage, her anxieties. Everything came rushing out. And she said, "How will anyone ever love me if I am too big or too small? How will anyone ever love me if I am so inconstant? How will anyone ever love me if what I feel is too much? How will anyone ever love me if I want to give love on my terms and in my time and not in theirs?" The tiny traveler smiled. "Oh, moon," she said. Thank you, tiny traveler. "Oh, moon," she said, "don't you know? From where your mother sits in the universe, there are shadows that obscure her view of you. Some nights you are small, but on the best of nights, you shine full and bright and beautiful, and you are as big as the sun and twice as glorious because we can look directly at you with all of our admiration and our love, and that's why we're here, so that we can look at you in all your fullness. Just because your mother can't see you doesn't mean that you're not there. Just because we can't see all of you doesn't mean you're not still full and bright and beautiful. Just because they can't see me doesn't mean that I'm not there," thought the moon. "Even without their gaze, I'm still here. I'm full, and I'm bright, and I'm beautiful." And for the first time in millions and billions of years, the moon saw herself reflected in the eyes of someone else, and she beamed more brightly than she ever had before because she loved what she saw. Thank you.
I love that about the moon, because what romance and lovers haven't looked at the moon and walked hand in hand under that moon to fall in love. Beautiful. Our next storyteller is Cynthia Milhorn. Now, Cynthia is an East Tennessee native and an ETSU graduate with her bachelor's, but she has traveled herself far and wide. She's worked as far away as South Africa as a drama director for children's theater. And much of her career, however, was spent in LA and Atlanta. I think she came here from Atlanta, where she was working. And some of those, she did so many things. One thing that stood out is she ran her own creative arts camp for children. She's an actor, an educator, who has even worked with Gene Roddenberry's son. You know Gene Roddenberry, who wrote Star Trek, and she worked with his son for that reboot in the 2000s, which has been quite popular. Many shows came out of that. She's experienced in improv as well as Shakespeare. But Cynthia fondly remembers being an entertainment and arts reporter right around here at Bristol Herald Courier. Let's welcome Cynthia Milhorn to the stage.
Stuff? I don't know. It's not that exciting. All right. Tonight, I want to tell you all a story, a special story from my heart, about a little girl that may have lived somewhere once upon a time. A little girl named Amia, and she was one of many children. Her mother had so many children that most parents wouldn't be able to keep track. of all of them. But the mother was so attentive, and each day she would gather her children around the table and hold each child's face in her hands, and she would look deep into their eyes and say, "You are worthy, you are wanted, you are loved. I love you." Well, one day the mother, being a very fun and good mother, piled her kids all into a wagon and took them out to the most beautiful scenic spot on the countryside. And they played all day long until their bodies were exhausted, their bellies were full with good food, and their hearts were uplifted. And as the sun began to set, she piled them all back into the wagon, and off they set for home. Now, the wagon was open so they could gaze up at the sky and look at the birds, and as the sun began to drop and the moon began to rise and it got darker and darker, the mother did not notice there was a deep dip in the road. And one of the wagon wheels hit that dip, and oh my goodness, every child bounced up out of the wagon. In fact, Amia bounced so high that the wind caught her and just carried her over so many fields and far away. Well, immediately the mother and the children stopped and got out of the wagon and searched for her. They searched for Amia until the sun came up, with no luck. And so they piled back into the wagon and they headed for home, with one child less to love. Well, the wind gently set Amia down in a field that was full of robust vegetation, and the leaves wrapped around the little girl, just about 3. She was just about 3, and held her so snugly all that night and kept her safe. And the next morning, the man and woman who owned that field came out to bring in their harvest, and they saw the little girl, and they thought to themselves, having no children of their own, we should have grown one of these a long time ago. And they scooped her up, and they took her into their home to raise her as their own. Well, now, Amia was only 3, but she had a couple of memories. That her name was Amia, which means love, and that she had a lot of brothers and sisters and a mother. A mother that told her every day, "You are worthy, you are wanted, you are loved, I love you." And so at night when she would go to bed, she would pull that memory out like a blanket and wrap it around herself all snug and warm. And she pulled it out so often, it became like a threadbare shawl. Now the couple, they didn't know much about kids. They only knew they wanted to raise her to be good and strong, a good citizen. And so they really focused on making her a hard worker. In fact, they changed her name most times to Amalia, which means hard worker. And so when she did a good job and everything was perfect, they would say, "Oh, Amalia, you are a hard worker. You are loved." But as happens, she made a lot of mistakes, as we all do. So she spilled the milk or broke eggs or tripped or fell or tore her dress. They would say, "Oh, Amia, you are so clumsy. You are hopeless." And if she ate too much at the table, the way little growing bellies want, they would say, "Oh, Amia, you are greedy, you are selfish, you want too much." And her heart would shrink a little smaller. Well, eventually the man and woman died, and they left Amia all alone. For a while, she took care of the farm. She knew all the things to do, but she just craved to hear that she was loved so desperately that she would pull out that memory like that old threadbare shawl and wrap it around herself, and it just couldn't keep her warm, not even a little anymore. So one night she couldn't take it anymore, and she ran out of the house and she looked up at the sky and she begged time to bring her that memory back. Something to plump up her heart just a little. And just then, the wind began to blow. As it blew, she heard this whisper, and it kind of tickled up her neck and into her ears, and it said, "You are worthy, you are wanted, you are loved." Oh, it felt really real. She got goosebumps, and She just leaned into that feeling, and the wind began to wrap itself around her neck and her waist and her arms and her legs and pull her toward itself in a new direction away from the house. And she heard it again, louder. You are worthy, you are wanted, you are loved. I love you. And in that moment, she felt like she was just that little 3-year-old again, and she had to reclaim it. She thought to herself, maybe the wind is taking me back to my family, and though they never came looking for me, and though they likely don't want me, I am such a disappointment. Maybe, just maybe. And she let the wind carry her until she began to run, and she went into a full sprint, and she ran all night long until the sun began to rise. And when the sun rose, she looked and saw a house on a hill with children spilling out of it and a mother coming behind them, and she thought, this must be my family. It looks just like them. But she stopped herself. They had never come to look for her. They had never come to reclaim her. Surely they would not want her as Amia. But as Amalia, hard worker, yes, then she could earn their love. And so she straightened her posture and straightened her dress, and she went right up to the mother and offered her help, and the mother was more than willing to accept her as a mother's helper. And Amalia, Amia, worked and worked and worked, and she did an excellent job. And at the end of that day, the mother came to her and offered her a bowl of broth and a crust of bread and a place to sleep in the barn. And though it was not exactly what Amia had been hoping for, she accepted it. And then, as the mother was walking back towards the house, she stopped and turned, and Amia's heart plumped up again as the woman said, "Oh, I forgot. Thank you." And then she turned on her way, and Mia's heart sank. And she sat on a bale of hay and prepared to eat the broth and the bread, and she looked in the windows of the house, and she saw the mother go from child to child and cradle each child's face in her hands and say things that Amia could only imagine, but she knew must be wonderful. And she went to bed that night more empty than when the day had begun. Well, she worked so hard for the mother every day in and day out, almost absolute perfection. But one day, as she was tucking the children in for their afternoon nap, she felt that little tickle inside the house, a little tickle on her neck and a little whisper, "You are worthy, you are wanted, you are loved." She raced down the stairs and out of the house, and she could feel the wind pulling her, and she could hear the refrain in her ears again, and she ran right into the woods, right in the direction. She didn't know where she was going, but she ran until suddenly she stopped when she saw the most beautiful little cottage with smoke piping out of the chimney and a beautiful table set right in front of the house with a beautiful tablecloth and flowers and delicious food and the finest of china. And behind that table there stood a beautiful woman wearing a red dress. This woman's eyes, well, they shone like lights in the darkest night, and she had the most warm and inviting smile, and she looked at Amia and she said, "Finally, I've been waiting for you. Come and eat." Amia looked. There was no one else. Without question, she went and sat at the table. She began to eat, and she ate until she was so full, and then she paused and she realized how much she had eaten. She said, I'm sorry, I want too much, I'm selfish, I'm sorry, I want too much." And the woman said, "No, you were empty, and now you are full." But Amia could not listen. She rose from the table and she ran, just berating herself the entire time as she ran back to the house to go back to work. But after that, Amia was a mess. The entire next day she was breaking eggs and spilling milk, and at long last she had just gathered a whole bunch of clean, pure, good-smelling white linen, bundled it up in her arms, and as she was carrying it back to the house, she tripped and fell in a huge pile of manure. Staining the linens of herself, and she just began to shake and she began to cry. She was humiliated, and she ran into the woods until she reached the house. And there the woman sat, right in front of the house, with a kettle over a fire, warming water. And she looked at Amia, who was stained and smelling terribly. And she said, "You're just in time. The bath should be perfect." Without any question, Amia followed her into the house, and the woman helped her out of her filthy clothes and into the bath. And she sang a gentle song to Amia as she just sat in that warm, sweet-smelling water. And she washed Amia's hair, and once she was clean, she helped her out and dried her so gently. And then she gave her a beautiful green dress to wear, a dress that was the color of a blade of grass on the first day of spring. And it fit Amia perfectly. And she couldn't believe it, and she began to smile and feel so nice. And then she realized, no, I've taken too long. I have to go back. And she ran all the way back to the house and went back to work. And at the end of that day, when she was given a bowl of broth and a crust of bread, she said, "Enough. I can't go on like this." And so she breathed deeply, and she went right up to the door of the house, and she knocked on the door. And the mother, exasperated for the day, said, "Yes, Amalia." "No, not Amalia. Do you not recognize me? Do you not know me? I am your daughter, Amia." The mother just looked confused and took a step back. And Amia said, "Will you not love me? I am yours." And the woman said, "Oh, girl, sweet girl, I cannot love you, for I do not know you." Oh, her head began to pound, and Amia's cheeks turned so hot like two coals, and tears began to stream down her face, and she ran back to the barn. And at that moment, that dress began to feel so tight. She just wanted it off. She was so uncomfortable, and she knew what she had to do. She ran right back into the woods and right to that woman's house, and she beat on the cottage door. And when the woman answered, she said, "Why did you do this to me? I was fine. I was good. I had enough. Why?" And the woman said, "You were broken. You were lonely. You were empty." And Amia said, "But at least I had the hope that she might have loved me. Now I know she does not." She fell down on the threshold and began to sob. And the woman knelt down in front of her and wrapped her arms around Amia and just rocked her all that night. Until finally Amia felt the warmth of the sunlight on her back, and she realized she wasn't on the threshold anymore. She was lying in a bed dressed in a clean white gown, surrounded by clean bed sheets. Then she heard a humming as the sun just bathed her head to toe in warmth and light. She turned to her side and she saw the woman in the red dress standing in front of a mirror and saying to herself, "You are worthy, you are wanted, you are loved. I love you." And Amia rose from the bed and went to the woman, and as soon as she arrived at her side, the woman took her hand and positioned her in front of the mirror, and together, side by side, they looked into the mirror. And the woman pressed her cheek against Amia's, and she whispered softly, "You are worthy, you are wanted, you are loved." Over and over she said this, until finally she said to Amia, "Now it's your turn." And Amia knew what she meant. She didn't want to say it. She didn't want to take that chance. And she knew she had to. And she breathed deeply. And she calmed herself. With quivering voice, she licked her lips and she looked into the mirror and she said, "I am worthy. I am wanted. I am loved. I love me." And in that moment, she closed her eyes and she felt electricity course through her veins. And she felt so alive, so whole. And when she opened her eyes, the woman was gone. And Amia stood there wearing a dress of red, crimson, the color of blood, the color of love.
You know, we really can't love anyone else until we love ourselves. And sometimes that's a lifelong journey to do that. Thank you, Cynthia. Our last storyteller tonight is Emily Catt. Emily has lived in East Tennessee all her life. She's worked in several different fields. She's in education, magazine publishing, and even veterinary medicine. But she first came to storytelling through her work as a Montessori teacher. And interestingly, that just led her eventually to us. She realized that really story is embedded in every aspect of life. I would like to add this, a couple of personal things about Emily. I've gotten to enjoy a Qigong class with her. So she's got a lot of wide interests, and we've had fun doing that on Fridays when it was going on. And she's a really good cook and loves to invite people over. She's a wonderful hostess. Let's welcome Emily Catt to the stage.
Sweet introduction, my gosh. Thank you, Dr. Reed. I didn't expect that. Thank you all for being here tonight. It's been so heartwarming to hear about love, but be able to share affection and our stories with you. So I'm hoping I've got my good, gruff ballad singing voice on. This is dedicated to my father-in-law, Bob, who taught me that ballads aren't all bad. So what is love supposed to look like? For my gruff, burly, ex-Navy man father-in-law, Bob, I think he loved his banjo. Now, he wasn't a declaring love sort of guy. He kept all his emotions kind of close to the chest, but he kept coming back to it and coming back to it. And he taught himself clawhammer and bluegrass and old time and ballads, and I'm saying words I didn't grow up with banjo. I don't know banjo, but he did. And he loved that banjo, even if it wasn't understood or appreciated. I think my mother-in-law, the tough, wiry, independent Martha, I don't think she loved Bob's banjo. When she saw him getting his case out, she would sort of loudly announce, it was a warning to anyone that could hear, loudly announce, "Oh Lord, Bob's got his banjo." And then she'd take off before the pickin' and the croonin' started. Lord Bateman was a noble lord. He thought himself of high degree. He could not rest nor be contented till he had sailed that old salt sea. Well, he sailed east and he sailed to the westward. He sailed on over to the Turkish shore, and there they caught and threw him in prison, never to be released anymore. So they were not lovey-dovey. They were not kissy-huggy. I had never really seen love like Bob and Martha. So I kind of watched them, like how does that work? They seemed like two islands. There was the independent island state of Martha, her own currency, her own career, her own culture. And then there was the little island of Bob over here, and he had clearly his own music culture that was, kind of his own thing, and his own money and his own hobbies, and they didn't really seem to touch. Two islands that don't touch. I don't know how that makes a marriage work, but it sure seemed to be working. It just, the connection, I couldn't really see the shape of it. And that was until about 6 years ago, when Bob got so sick. This sickness started in his gut, and no one caught it. And it turned into this extensive emergency gut surgery that took him down and down with complications and sepsis and more infection and more complications, in and out of ICU. And he got from a burly, strong man that could build a barn by himself down to this shriveled whisper of himself. It was pitiful. And it took a time in ICU, after all these other times, where the days turned into weeks, and he got thinner and paler, laying there with tubes and wires in him, and looking pale, lifeless, and was there so long they had to cut and make a tracheostomy into him so that he could breathe. And that was the first time that we realized Bob might not pick up a banjo again, and he might not sing again. So that was hard for all of us to realize. There grew a tree inside his prison. There grew a tree both broad and high, and there they took and bound him prisoner, till he grew weak and like to die. Well, the Turk, he had one only daughter, and she was fair as fair could be. She stole the keys to father's prison, and she vowed Lord Bateman she'd set free. So through this sickness, I could see the health and the shape of what was binding them together. They weren't two islands, really. They were on an ocean, but they seemed to be kind of sailing around each other. Because Martha kept coming back. She didn't leave him. She was there day after day, week after week, and she was helping him fight the storms and fight the winds. And Bob, he kept coming back. He tried against every odd all the odds, against belief, against pain and what we thought any human body could stand. He kept coming back until he couldn't come back anymore. So, what is love supposed to look like? It can take a lot of shapes. It can look like an ocean, it can look like a banjo. But through Bob and Martha, I can see that it looks like still trying to find each other and not giving up. She took him down to the deepest cellar. She gave him drink of strongest wine. She threw her loving little arms around him, crying, "Oh, Lord Bateman, you were mine." They made a vow, they made a promise. For 7 long years they made it stand. He vowed he would marry no other lady, and she vowed she'd marry no other man. 7 long years has rolled along, 7 years and it feels like 99. At last she packed up her gay clothing, and she vowed Lord Bateman she'd go find. So she sailed to the east and she sailed to the westward. She sailed on over to the English shore. She sailed on up to Lord Bateman's castle, and she summoned the porter right down to the door. "Is this not Lord Bateman's castle? And is his lordship not within?" "Oh yes, cried the proud young porter. "He's just now taken a new bride in. Go bid him send me a slice of cake. Go bid him send me a drink of wine, and not to forget the Turkish lady who had freed you from your close confine. What's the news, you proud young porter? What's the news you bring to me? There stands at the door of your castle a lady. She's the fairest one I ever did see. She has got a gold ring upon every finger, and on a one of them she's got 3, and enough gay gold all around her middle as to buy Northumberland a fee. She bids you send her a slice of cake. She bids you send her a drink of wine, and not to forget the Turkish lady who had freed you from your close confine. Well, then spoke the new bride's mother, who never was heard to speak so free. What's to become of my only daughter? She was just now made a bride of thee. Well, I've done no harm to your only daughter, and she is none of the worse for me. She came to me on a horse and saddle, and she shall go home in coterie. Lord Bateman then pounded his fists on the table. He broke it in pieces, 1, 2, 3, said, I'd forsake all for that Turkish lady. She has crossed that old salt sea for me.
Thank you for a lovely ballad. Very nicely done. A sweet story. This brings us to the end of our program. And again, we want to thank you for having us. I'm really glad that Tanasi Arts is doing what they can to spread so many of the arts and crafts in our area, in Unicoi and the surrounding area. And check with us again sometime. We'd love to come back.
Thank you, and thank you folks so much. I mean, what a range of talent. I was really amazed, from different kinds of music and great theatrical acting and, and just telling stories that seem to be your own personal stories and, a lot of things. I was really impressed, and I wish we had 10 times as many people here.